Remember when one dog was smarter than every adult on screen and the adults never once seemed to notice? That was Lassie, the CBS family drama that ran from 1954 to 1971 before moving into syndication through 1973. The premise included a rough collie living on a farm with a rotating cast of families, solving problems, detecting danger, and routinely rescuing whoever needed it that week, usually a boy named Timmy. Jon Provost played Timmy Martin, the kid with an extraordinary gift for finding trouble. June Lockhart played his mother Ruth, who kept the household running with alarming composure given everything happening around her. And Lassie, well, Lassie played the only competent decision-maker on the property. For 19 seasons, the show made it look simple. Behind the scenes, almost nothing about it was. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Lassie you probably never knew. Before we get into it, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube put this in front of more classic TV fans who'd want to see it. Stick around for number 1, because the real story behind who was actually playing Lassie will completely change how you remember the show. Let's head over to the farm. Number 15. Lassie was a good girl, played by very good boys. For 19 seasons, America was absolutely devoted to Lassie. Loyal, brave, impossibly photogenic, and female. One of those things was not true. Every single dog who played Lassie was male. Across the entire run, the most famous female dog in television history was played exclusively by a rotating cast of very committed good boys. The reasoning was entirely practical. Female collies shed heavily tied to their heat cycle. A full coat blowout roughly every 7 to 10 months that would have turned continuity into a genuine catastrophe. Lush and majestic in one scene, visibly halfway through a molt in the next. Male collies kept a steadier coat year-round, carried more of the thick neck mane that gave Lassie her signature look, and had the kind of on-screen presence that made the whole heroic dog premise easier to sell. Production made the call early, and even after grooming techniques improved enough to manage the shedding issue, nobody bothered revisiting it. Keeping the illusion intact required some behind-the-scenes coordination. Camera operators worked specific angles. Groomers got strategic about coat length in certain regions with enough consistency that nobody watching at home ever had reason to wonder. The combination of strategic framing and meticulous grooming held for nearly 2 decades without a single crack. The most famous good girl in television was a casting illusion that held for 19 seasons, and not one viewer ever questioned it. Number 14. The dog out-earned the entire cast. At some point in the Lassie operation, someone on the payroll had to sit down, look at the numbers, and come to terms with the fact that the collie was out-earning members of the human cast. It started early. On the 1943 film Lassie Come Home, Pal, the original Lassie, was pulling in $250 a week. A then-unknown 11-year-old named Elizabeth Taylor, in only her second film role, was making $100. The dog was earning more than double the future 2-time Oscar winner, and nobody in the industry seemed to find this remarkable at the time. By the TV era, Pal was reportedly earning up to $4,000 a week at his peak, the equivalent of roughly $50,000 a week in today's money. The child actors were not in the same financial universe. The real windfall traced back to a decision Rudd Weatherwax, Lassie's owner and trainer, made in 1951, well before the TV show ever existed. When MGM shut down the Lassie film series, they owed Weatherwax around $40,000 in back pay and wanted out of his contract. Weatherwax offered a trade. Instead of cash, he'd take the Lassie name and trademark. MGM, figuring the franchise was winding down anyway, agreed. That probably looked like the short end of the deal at the time. It was the smartest move anyone made in that entire negotiation. 3 years later, when CBS launched the TV series, Weatherwax walked in already owning Lassie. Toys, comics, books, lunchboxes, the merchandise generated millions in royalties, and every dollar flowed directly to the guy who'd taken a trademark over a check. The actors collected their fixed salaries, and that was the end of it. No piece of what their four-legged co-star's face was generating in every toy counter in America. Number 13. Every network wanted its own Lassie. By the time Lassie had spent a few seasons making every adult on screen look mildly incompetent by comparison, the rest of television had taken careful notes. The formula was near straightforward enough to replicate. Take one animal, give it near supernatural instincts, surround it with well-meaning humans who require constant assistance, and let the animal carry the whole operation. Networks ran with it immediately. Flipper arrived on NBC in 1964, co-created by Riku Browning and Jack Cowden, specifically as an aquatic counterpart to Lassie. Browning said outright he got the idea watching his kids watch Lassie and decided to try the same thing with a dolphin. Same boy and loyal animal setup, same weekly rescue structure, just swap the farm for the Florida coast and replace the barking with dramatic dolphin sounds that were actually sped-up recordings of a kookaburra bird. The show ran 3 seasons on the back of 2 earlier feature films and stayed in family programming rotation for decades. Australia entered the conversation in 1968 with Skippy the bush kangaroo, openly modeled on the overseas success of both Lassie and Flipper, and pitched domestically as the country's answer to the genre. The heroic animal formula translated cleanly to the Australian bush, with the significant upgrade that Skippy could also clear a fence from a standing position. Gentle Ben gave the format a 650-pound bear, in case anyone felt the concept of a manageable animal protagonist was getting stale. It was also produced by Ivan Tors, the same guy behind Flipper, which means by 1967, at least one producer was openly copying himself. The littlest hobo ran a wandering German shepherd through a different town every episode, essentially turning the Lassie premise into an anthology series. Every one of those shows borrowed the same architecture Lassie had built. Most lasted a few seasons. Lassie ran for 19 years, long enough to watch an entire generation of imitators launch, peak, and disappear while the original was still on the air. Number 12. The show convinced America to buy a collie. Somewhere in the late 1940s and through the 1950s, millions of American families watched a rough collie single-handedly outperform every adult on screen and arrived at the same conclusion. They needed one of those. The numbers backed up the impulse. Following the 1943 film Lassie Come Home, collie registrations with the American Kennel Club went from about 2,000 a year to well over 15,000 within 3 years. By the late 1940s, the rough collie had climbed to the 3rd most popular breed in the country, and it held that kind of visibility right through the peak of the TV series. The cultural shift ran deeper than breed registrations. Lassie didn't invent the sentimental family dog. Writers like Albert Payson Terhune had been romanticizing collies since the 1910s, and Rin Tin Tin had already proven a dog could carry Hollywood. But Lassie moved that idea into every living room in America and never let it leave. Researchers eventually put a name to what the show demonstrated: the Lassie effect, the measurable influence of on-screen animals on real-world pet ownership trends. A 2014 study of 87 dog films found that a well-placed dog character could shift breed popularity for up to a decade after its release. Lassie spent every episode rescuing one child from assorted disasters. In the process, she became the face of the American pet dogs promotion from background character to full family member, and the country went along with it completely. By the time the show hit its peak, Lassie wasn't just a character. She was setting expectations real dogs had no chance of living up to. Number 11. That theme you love showed up 4 years late. That warm, whistling theme everyone instantly connects to Lassie was not there when the show started. The original theme was an orchestral piece composed by William Lava, and it wasn't even original Lassie. CBS recycled it directly from a 1940 radio drama called The Courageous Dr. Christian, which set a very specific tone: dramatic, serious. A lightly reworked variation of that same theme carried the next couple of seasons, and then the show briefly pivoted to an orchestral arrangement of Dio Possente, an aria from Charles Gounod's opera Faust, originally sung by a soldier entrusting his sister's safety to God before heading off to war. An opera aria about going off to war for a show about a collie on a farm? Season 5 is where everything locked in. Composer Les Baxter wrote a new theme. Whistler Muzzy Marcellino performed it, and The Whistler, as it became known, ran for 6 straight seasons covering the entire Timmy era. The whistled theme landed right as the show was hitting its cultural peak, and the two things reinforced each other completely. When the series shifted to its Forest Ranger format, the Whistler stuck around in a fuller orchestral arrangement for a while before being replaced entirely. The final season swapped in Nathan Scott's arrangement of Greensleeves, which carried the show through to the end. The one everyone remembers didn't show up until season 5 and proceeded to retroactively become the sound of the whole show in everyone's memory, which is an impressive trick for something that arrived 4 years late. Number 10. How they faked an entire farm. Lassie presented rural America as a place of golden light, clean air, and spotless clothing. It was a lovely picture. It was also almost entirely manufactured inside a Hollywood studio. The farmhouse interiors were built as a permanent set on Stage 1 of KTTV Studios in Los Angeles for the first few seasons, before production moved to Desilu in 1957. Lighting was engineered to produce a perpetual warm glow that real 1950s rural homes never actually had. Actual farmhouses ran darker, dustier, and considerably less cinematic. The production ran on a factory floor schedule. 15 script pages shot per day, 6 days a week, 3 complete episodes finished per week, which meant nothing was shot in episode order. Crew would film a stack of barn scenes, then a stack of kitchen scenes, then a stack of front porch scenes, and then later the editors would chop up the footage into 4 or 5 different episodes. The farm the audience thought they were watching was partly assembled in the editing room. Much of the outdoor work happened at the Iverson Movie Ranch in Chatsworth, California, filming location that had been making Los Angeles look like somewhere else since the silent film era. The same rocky hills that doubled as the Old West, the African savanna, and alien planets on 100 other productions were also doubling as the Martin family's land on Lassie. The wardrobe completed the illusion. June Lockhart as Ruth Martin was supposedly running a working farm in pressed, spotless clothing with hair that appeared entirely unbothered by physical labor. The apron was always clean, the outfit was always crisp. Real farm work involves mud, livestock, and a general atmosphere of controlled chaos. Ruth Martin's wardrobe suggested she had never personally encountered any of those things. Put it all together and you had a version of rural America so clean, so warm, and so perfectly lit that actual farmers watching at home must have found the whole thing deeply relaxing fiction. Number 9. Timmy's in the well! Well, not really. For decades, one phrase has followed Lassie everywhere. Quick! Timmy's in the well! Here's the problem. It never happened. Not once. Not in a single episode across the show's entire 591-episode run. Timmy Martin, played by Jon Provost, was chased, cornered, nearly swept away, and routinely in situations that would have gotten most children permanently grounded. He fell into a lake twice, got caught in quicksand, tumbled into a mine, and once wound up wedged between 2 railroad cars. Wells, somehow, were the one hazard he managed to avoid completely. This is textbook Mandela effect. A collective false memory so widely shared that nobody stopped to actually check. The formula was real enough. Timmy gets into trouble. Lassie loses her mind trying to communicate the situation to a group of adults who were genuinely terrible at reading an agitated dog. Crisis gets resolved. The specific well detail just never made it into any script. Comedians and late-night hosts picked up "Timmy's in the well" as a universal shorthand for the show's rescue of the week structure. And somehow between the punchlines and the reruns, the bit calcified into what everyone assumed was actual television history. Jon Provost eventually leaned into the whole thing by titling his autobiography, "Timmy's in the Well," and then used the book to confirm the incident never happened in any episode. The twist? There was exactly one well incident in the entire run of the show. Season 17. Lassie falls down one herself. Number 8. Lassie was basically sponsored by soup. For 19 seasons, Lassie had exactly one sponsor, one company, one deal, one very long-running arrangement between a heroic collie and a can of soup. Campbell's Soup Company signed on before the show even aired in 1954 and stayed through the entire network run until 1971, then followed it into syndication for good measure. Most productions today juggle hundreds of advertisers across a single season. Lassie ran nearly 2 decades on one handshake. The targeting was deliberate. Campbell's wanted women and children, the people actually deciding what ended up on the dinner table, and a wholesome family show about a heroic dog was about as direct a line to that audience as anyone could engineer. Lassie saves the day. Family exhales. Cut to a steaming bowl of tomato soup. The cast made the arrangement even more seamless. June Lockhart and Jon Provost appeared in Campbell's commercials during the breaks. The line between Lassie the drama and Lassie the marketing vehicle blurred so consistently that after a while it was hard to tell where one ended and the other started. Campbell's also ran fan premiums, Lassie-branded rings and wallets distributed by the thousands because brand loyalty built early tends to stick. It took about 15 years before they launched a direct product tie-in, a dog food line called Recipe, featuring Lassie's face on the label, which is either a natural evolution or the most on-brand ending to a corporate partnership in TV history. For nearly 2 decades, Lassie saved the day, and somewhere right behind her, Campbell's made sure dinner was already handled. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this one, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube put this in front of more classic TV fans who'd want to see it. Drop a comment below. Tell us your most vivid Lassie memory. Alright, let's see what Timmy's gotten himself into now. Number 7. Lassie never had a goodbye. After 19 seasons and 591 episodes, Lassie went out in the middle of a March afternoon like it was any other week. The final episode, titled The Dawning, aired on March 24, 1973. The plot involved Lassie tracking down a runaway calf and keeping it safe from predators. A perfectly competent episode of television that gave absolutely no indication it was the last one. Roll credits, go to bed, tune in next week. Except there was no next week. By that point, the show had already been through more reinventions than most franchises attempt in a lifetime. 5 distinct eras, 5 different settings and casts, ending with Lassie stationed at the Holden Ranch, a home for troubled children out west that represented the final cast configuration the show had cycled through. CBS had already pulled the plug in 1971 as part of the so-called Rural Purge, a house cleaning that also took out Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, and the Beverly Hillbillies. Lassie got 2 more years in syndication before the ratings finally gave out, and the plug eventually came out of the wall with the same quiet efficiency the show had always operated with. There was no farewell episode, no final rescue designed to bring the whole thing full circle. Just a stray calf, a job completed, and a series that had been on the air since black and white TV was the default, simply stopping. Lassie spent 2 decades teaching audiences that every problem had a resolution. The show itself never bothered to take its own advice. Number 6. Lassie had better working conditions than the kids. Lassie was a collie whose schedule, food, and overall comfort got treated as production priorities. Somewhere further down the list were the child actors, working long days and memorizing pages they'd received that morning. Under Rudd Weatherwax's management, the primary dog was the most valuable asset on set, and everyone behaved accordingly. If Lassie needed a break, the whole production waited. If her energy was off, the schedule bent around it. The dogs did most of their own work, running, swimming, action shots, with stand-ins reserved for the rare scenes involving actual dangerous animals like wolves or cougars. Jon Provost once summed the whole setup up perfectly. All the actors make more mistakes than the dog. Child labor laws existed in the 1950s. They were just covering considerably less ground than they do today, and a weekly network series was not in the habit of slowing down to find out where the edges were. The on-set school was, there. Provost himself has described squeezing his actual education into set changes, which suggests technically present was doing most of the heavy lifting in that department. Lassie had a schedule built around her comfort. The kids had their lines due by call time. One of those groups had a better deal, and it was the one who couldn't read the contract. Number 5. The only club in Hollywood with a 3-dog guest list. At some point in Hollywood history, a collie accumulated enough cultural capital to earn a star on the Walk of Fame. The humans who worked alongside her for years did not all get that same call. Lassie's star sits at 6368 Hollywood Boulevard, dedicated on February 8, 1960, as part of the original mass installation that turned the sidewalk into a landmark. The company she keeps up there is genuinely exclusive. The only dogs ever honored on the Walk of Fame are Rin Tin Tin, Strongheart, and Lassie. 3 dogs. That's the entire dog list. Flipper didn't make it. Mr. Ed didn't make it. Trigger didn't make it. Every other famous real-life animal performer looked at that particular door and found it closed. The star was the official acknowledgement of something fans had already worked out on their own. Public appearances told the story clearly. Crowds showed up, spotted the dog, and largely lost interest in whoever was standing next to her. The human cast was present. Lassie was the event. Number 4. Behind the scenes, Lassie was highly engineered. Every week, Lassie would read the room, identify the crisis, and execute the exact right move at the exact right moment. It looked like pure instinct. It was considerably more engineered than that. Weatherwax ran Lassie's performances through a system the audience never saw coming. Behind the scenes, there were typically 2 dog trainers on set, each teetering on a stepladder just out of frame, each waving a chunk of meat. Per June Lockhart, who played Ruth Martin, when Lassie appeared to be locked on to Jon Provost during dialogue, she was actually looking past Provost at a piece of beef. When the line came back to Lockhart, the trainer behind her would whisper, "Lassie," and wave another piece of meat, and the dog's head would turn. The heartfelt conversational attention the audience read as emotional intelligence was a dog tracking snacks across the room. A typical shoot involved up to 4 separate Lassies on set. The main dog, a stand-in for rehearsals, a stunt double, and a dedicated fighter for scenes with other animals. The sound editors cut out every trace of the trainers whispering during takes. Complex sequences like opening a door, grabbing a specific object, or barking for help got broken down into discrete shots, each filmed individually, then stitched together in the editing room into what played as one seamless, decisive action. Lockhart admitted the hierarchy openly in a 2004 interview. Often, if the scene had gone well and the humans had flubbed their lines, the producers would print the take anyway if the dog was right. The humans were the ones who needed to keep up. Number 3. Lassie filmed scenes with real dangerous animals. Lassie was about as wholesome as television got. A dog who radiated calm competence while everyone around her fell apart. Just the coziest hour of your week. And then sometimes there was a real cougar on set. Several episodes required Lassie to share a frame with actual dangerous animals. Cougars, wolves, bears, jaguars, bobcats. Episodes like The Bear, The Wolf Cub, Realm of the Wild, and Lassie Bates a Bear all put the franchise's most valuable asset within camera range of animals that could genuinely kill her. The bear in The Bear was trained by Frank Inn, who later became famous for training Benji. The production took the risk seriously and brought in specialist trainers. The camera did most of the heavy lifting. That dramatic life-or-death confrontation was carefully blocked and shot from angles specifically chosen to make two animals standing a safe distance apart look like an absolutely harrowing near-death experience. Hot wires were run between the animals just out of frame. Trainers stood by with harnesses, meat lures, and control signals. Mock-up dummy dogs filled in for contact shots where the primary dog had to appear to be grabbed, bitten, or dragged. The growling and snarling was layered in by the sound editors afterward. The production also kept a separate fighter Lassie on standby, a dedicated double whose only job was battle scenes. The heroic leap that looked terrifying on screen was filmed in short, controlled, perfectly manageable movements, stitched together in the editing room into something that played as genuine danger. So, while families were curled up at home watching Lassie fearlessly stare down a mountain lion, the production crew was just off camera running a carefully engineered illusion, and quietly hoping everyone's training held up that afternoon. Number 2. The Day They Wrote Off Timmy and Called It a Plot. In 1964, Lassie's producers looked at one of television's most beloved relationships and decided to blow the whole thing up in 3 episodes. The setup arrived in a 3-part season opener called The Wayfarers. Timmy's father landed a job opportunity in Australia, the family packed up, and everyone prepared to relocate. Then came the snag. Australian quarantine law required any incoming dog to sit out a 6-month waiting period before entering the country. The Martin family's solution was to leave Lassie behind entirely. The dog, who had spent years pulling Timmy out of every conceivable disaster, got handed off to an elderly family friend named Collie Wilson, while the people she had dedicated her life to boarded a plane to another continent. 6 months of quarantine apparently felt unreasonable. Abandoning their heroic dog in a foreign country apparently did not. When Collie suffered a heart attack and could no longer manage the situation, Lassie passed to Corey Stewart, a U.S. Forest Service ranger who had already appeared on the show, which was the only graceful part of an otherwise extremely abrupt transition. Overnight, the series transformed completely. Viewers who spent a decade watching a family drama tuned in for season 11 and found a wilderness action series running in its slot. It remains one of the most jarring pivots in television history, executed with the confidence of a production that had absolutely no interest in explaining itself. Number 1. Lassie was basically a royal bloodline. Most TV roles come with auditions. Lassie had a different system. You either had the bloodline or you didn't. The original dog was Pal, a rough collie who starred in the 1943 film Lassie Come Home before showing up for the 2 TV pilots in 1954. After that, Pal retired and handed the role to his son, Lassie Jr., who took over when the regular broadcast series launched. From that point forward, the casting conversation was essentially over before it started. Lassie Jr. gave way to his sons Spook and Baby. Baby handed the role to his own son, Meyer. Meyer then passed it to his son, Hey Hey, who worked the final 2 seasons. 5 generations of Pal's direct bloodline, all playing the same character across the show's entire 1954 to 1973 run. And the audience never noticed because the operation was that consistent. The humans cycled through constantly, families changed, the whole supporting cast turned over multiple times. Lassie stayed exactly the same because there was always another Pal descendant ready to step in and carry the franchise. Pal himself, who lived to nearly 20, was reportedly brought to set to meet and work with his own successors. A literal dynastic handoff. The training side ran the same way. Rudd Weatherwax handled Pal and the early dogs. His son Robert came up alongside him in the early 1960s and took over after Rudd's death in 1985, and kept the whole operation running until 2002 when the Weatherwax family voted to sell the Lassie trademark. 2 families, 1 canine, 1 human, locking down every corner of the same franchise for almost 60 years. And when a 1997 revival tried casting a non-Pal bloodline collie in the role, fans protested until producers brought in a Weatherwax-trained 9th-generation descendant. Even the audience enforced the Dynasty. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Lassie. Which one hit you the most? Which one genuinely surprised you? Subscribe, share this with a friend who grew up watching Lassie save the day every week, and we'll see you next time. Until next time, this is Remember When.